Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. It still baffles me that God keeps asking me to do things I suck at. And I don't know why it baffles me, considering I know that this is his style. It's what he does to make us better. It's a godly principle we see manifested every day in human life. I have two super talented musicians as brothers. My dad put a bass guitar in the arms of one and a keyboard in front of the other and taught them the basics on how to play. And they were trash at the beginning. Like they could only play like the melody of a familiar song, but it was out of rhythm and slightly out of tune. But that was part of the process. They persevered. I remember as soon as school was over and we would get home, one of my brothers would run upstairs to his room, turn on that Yamaha that he had sitting on his dresser right next to his bed, and he would play for hours. And then the other one, he would click on his amp sometime after nightfall, and he would just pluck on those strings until sometimes I just fell asleep. And I could just still hear the bass just reverberating through the walls and into my room. Now, they weren't playing for that long when my dad called them out of youth ministry and told them that they'd start being the primary musicians in the sanctuary with the adults. And they were still kids. I remember how afraid they were. But now, they're getting paid good money to do it. One of the things I was pondering after meditating on Hebrews 3 was how much God hates fear. And I think it's safe to say that succumbing to fear is sin, just as succumbing to lust or anger or any other spirit is. I used to think that God pitied us when we feared, that if we were disobedient to him because we were afraid to do it, then it's okay. But now I know that is so far from the truth. When the man who hid his talents in the ground said that he didn't obey his master because he was afraid, what did the master do? He cast him out into outer darkness, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. We also know that faith pleases God. And if fear is the opposite of faith, then fear must displease God. Thirdly, God is only aware of his greatness. So us holding our relatively measly troubles up to God and considering them greater than him is an insult to God. And an insult he doesn't take too kindly. To bring it home, Revelations 21 and 8, it lists the fearful as being one who will have their portion in the lake of fire. He lists the fearful with the liars and the murderers, because there is never an excuse for disobeying God. And the fearful one lacks faith, and only faith saves us. The main point is, we've got to stop being so afraid. Just this weekend, I was meditating on Joshua 1, where he was reminding Joshua and the children of Israel that being strong and courageous was a command, not a suggestion. God requires faith, and faith requires obedience. And this is true even when you take a leap of faith and obey God, and it doesn't go the way you thought it would. There are times when we obey God and we're like, oh wow, thank God I trusted you, because look at how beautifully all of this played out when I did it. Other times, not so much. Like, it doesn't always play out that way. I'll give you an example. So there was a season in my life when God was pushing me to do street evangelism. And if you're unfamiliar with street evangelism, it's when you go out in public and you talk to people you don't know, and you offer to share your faith, and you commit to praying with and for them if they are open to it. So at the time, I couldn't think of anything more terrifying. So I told him no. One thing you'll learn about God, though, is that when he gives you a command, he doesn't really come off of it, even if you say no. It'll come back around, and it definitely did. So one morning I got up, many moons later, and he said, go out and evangelize at the park. And it was a particular park because it was the same park that I pulled up to months earlier and chickened out. Like, I got there, got outside of the car, got afraid, got back in my car, turned back around and went home. So this time I said, I'm going to call in reinforcements. I sent word to some fellow believers, and 3 other people committed to arriving at 6:30 rather, to join me. And I was hyped. Like, yes, I'm going to obey God. We're going to get out here. We're going to get these souls. Let's do it. Then 6:45 rolled around and no one showed. And I almost did the same thing I did before, got back in my car and went home. But I remembered that God didn't say, if people show up, go evangelizing. He said, you go. Thus began one of the weirdest hours of my life. So I found this man sitting on the rocks by the water, just enjoying the view. I will never forget this man, Douglas. So I mentioned his view, how beautiful it was, and we entered what had to be like this 15-20 minute conversation on the hidden natural treasures of Michigan. Michigan is so beautiful. So I decided that after this talk, it might actually be a good time to go into salvation with them. So I decided to test the waters by bringing up how incredible God was to have created all of this. What happened next, I wasn't at all prepared for. I feel like I could have handled outright rejection better than what happened. So Douglas had a New Age spiritual worldview. He was against organized religion like Christianity, and he actually believed, on the same token, that all religions were right. He spoke of chakra and auras and all kinds of things that would cause the older church ladies at my church to clutch their pearls. When I tried to bring up the Bible, he said the Bible wasn't completely right because not of the reasons that we often hear, like it's made by man, but he said that English couldn't actually translate Jesus' words because Jesus said it in an ancient, sacred language. And he also said that it was missing a lot of what Jesus was really saying, things we don't know because they weren't written. And the crazy thing was, he knew the scriptures. He would reference the Bible out of context, and I would try to clarify what the Bible said in context, but he'd go back to, but that's the thing. You have to read between his words. That's not what's really written. So he shared a whole host of other things for well over 45 minutes. And I finally had to end it with him because I was being so discouraged by our conversation. There was nothing I could say to bring us on a similar foundation. And quite frankly, he and the devil were making me look like a fool because I couldn't stand up for my faith or my beliefs. I didn't have anything that I could say to counteract what he said. And he knew this because he said, you're not enlightened enough. I didn't find anyone else to witness to after that. Thank goodness. But I did obey God by going out to witness, but I didn't win a single soul. And I actually ended up talking to someone who whooped me up and down with ideas I couldn't understand and questions I couldn't answer. So then this started forming questions in my mind. Well, what if I'm wrong? It was that same nagging doubt that I had when I was in college. What if I'd done all of this? Or if I keep doing all of this faith and belief and commitment to God, only to be wrong? To be honest, sometimes I feel like I don't really have a leg to stand on, just like I felt Douglas didn't either. So after that happened, instead of descending into despair and walking toward the path of abandoning my faith, I just decided to study more. And my searching eventually led me to apologetics, where I learned how to give a defense for the faith instead of becoming immediately overwhelmed by contrary doctrines. I threw myself into it for a while, and I actually have recently returned to it again after another challenge to my faith. And I thought initially apologetics would help me win arguments, but in reality, it's helped me to relate to God and approach His Word differently, using all of me, not just my heart or my hands. I started to use my mind to have deeper and more complex conversations with God. And this strengthened my faith. After years of doubt and wrestling with what's true and what's not, today I am secure, not because I have all the answers, but because I'm tight with the one who does. I believe that's why God loved Jacob so much, and that's why He used him to birth these 12 tribes, a minority in the world who would change the course of history forever. Who was Jacob? He was a perseverer. He did persevere by some shady means, don't get me wrong, but perseverance was such a strong part of his character that God knew that when He got a hold of him, He could count on him. While Esau was busy despising his birthright, Jacob peeped the opportunity to become part of this incredible legacy that just began with a promise to his grandfather. And he was like, you know what? I want in. And he'd get in by any means necessary. And what a huge L on Esau's part. I mean, I can't get over this. Can you imagine? We could be saying, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. Greatest fumble in history. Look at how not lazy Jacob was. He worked 14 years only because he was determined to have the wife he wanted. He worked another 6 years just to prove to Laban that he wasn't a crook and that he could make his flock flourish without his help and with God leading him. And then we all love this part. He gets into the wilderness and he actually wrestles, physically wrestles with God until daybreak. Talk about stamina. Classic perseverance. A refusal to quit even when the odds are stacked against you. So what does God do? He blesses him and gives him a name that we still use today. Incredible. Imagine we had that same spiritual audacity. Even when he was afraid, he took it to God and said, listen, remember you told me you were going to make a great nation out of me? Okay, do that by rescuing me from my brother. He's going to kill me. Instead of running away with our tails between our legs when we're scared, we come like children and we go to our Father and we say, remember you said? And then we obey him because we know that God is more than capable of doing what he said he will do. One of my favorite passages in Psalms says, whenever I'm afraid, I just trust in him. He just makes it so simple. So don't be afraid of running out of money. Don't be afraid about what people are saying about you or will say about you. Don't be afraid to jump into something new or foreign to you. Kick fear's butt and do it anyway. Persevere in faith and obedience to Christ so that you too will be someone God can count on.